Okay, good evening. First, I'd like to begin by dedicating the class. Steve lost his father, Abraham, son of Shia and son of Ethel. Said Hamakam Menachem Eschem Sich Shar Avlitzin Yerushalayim should be consoled with all the grievers and mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Especially this period in time, this is when we grieve for the destruction of the temple. We're middle of the 9 days, which concludes next Tuesday with Tisha B'Av. So we always hope Mashiach should come, but in case he doesn't, the day of Tisha B'Av, Tuesday, is a 24-hour fast, saddest day in the Jewish calendar. We commemorate 5 tragic events that happened on that day in history. 5, the Mishnah enumerates 5, actually more than that happened. And maybe the one that is most prominent, obviously, is the destruction of both the first and second temples, respectively by the Babylonians, and then 490 years later, by the Romans. Same day, exactly, the temple was burned down. And what we see today, when you go to Israel, you see the Kotel Hamaravi, the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. That is a leftover remnant of the Second Temple, part of the outer wall. If you ever take those tours in the tunnels beneath the Old Jerusalem, a fascinating sense of what Jerusalem looked like in those days, because it was like a city built upon a city. You know, that after all the ruins, and you could actually see how the Romans deliberately tried to eradicate every remnant memory of the temple. See, Herod, when he built that second temple, one of the things he did, because it was a mountain, so there was one of the most brilliant architectural feats. He figured out how do you create a building on top of a mountain if you want to really have stability. So he created a type of what's the word for it? It's like a structure that would create around the mountain, that turned the mountain into a plateau upon which he built the temple. So it wouldn't have any of the difficulties of building. Even today when they build things on mountains, there's a particular method used, and he was one of the first to master that method, because the temple had to be on a mount, Temple Mount, Har HaBayis. So he built it. So when the Romans destroyed the outer temple, meaning the physical building, this remaining crown, so to speak, remained in the mountain, in the hill. You could see it. And they tried to get rid of it, but he built it so well, so deep down. So when you go down to those tunnel tours, you can see the sections where they tried to demolish and the areas they couldn't even reach because it was too deep down under the ground. Anyway, so this is a period of grieving, which we shall discuss. So I just wanted to honor your father and his soul, which goes on to his journey. It continues on. And may it give you strength and your family, and you should know only good things. I also want to dedicate the class to a good friend of ours. Steve is dedicating it to a friend, his dear friend, Yvonne Trepanier. I hope I pronounced it right. He says, he was a mensch and I miss him dearly. I knew him for 20 plus years, and his untimely passing shocked and saddened me. So may the study and the teachings and the discussions we have this evening be in the merit of these two souls specifically, and all the people out there on the internet and the web, World Wide Web, wherever you may be. It is an interesting thing, that we can all connect today through technology, many souls from all over the place. And I guess if it's broadcast all over this earth, it probably is also broadcast up to heaven. So I'm sure the souls where they are can tune in. I don't know if they need the technology, but souls hear things, which I often mention in case any of you fall asleep during the class. Just remember that your soul don't feel completely guilty. Your soul continues to listen, and but that's not I'm not suggesting that. It's not one of the things that but I'm just mentioning it just in case. So tonight's topic, appropriate to the time we're in, is transforming or turning tears into joy, turning sadness or tears into joy. and I titled it Beyond Tears. The theme of sadness, happiness, and sadness is one of the most, what can you say, popular themes, if you can call it that. I mean popular, I mean in the sense that most of us are interested in it. It's up there, right near relationships. And I know this because I've traveled quite extensively, and I remember once a program director who was planning an evening with me in the West Coast, and she called and was months ahead planning what topics to talk about. So I asked her, what the people are interested in. She said, I'd rather hear your experience. From your travels and your journeys, what are the most popular themes? So I said, well, hands down, the first top two are, number one is relationships, romance, love, sexuality, intimacy, everything in that category. It's called the broad category called relationships. And number two, close second, is pain and suffering. And I remember, without missing a beat, she said to me on the phone, those aren't two topics, the same thing. So I said, you must be going through a difficult situation. She says, we all are, which was interesting to me that, relationships, of course, can bring a lot of love and beauty and happiness into our lives, joy. But at the same time, anything when your emotions are vulnerable and your heart is open, just like great, beautiful things can enter, also pain can go in there. When we have our walls up and defenses up, you don't experience much happiness, perhaps, but you also don't experience much pain. And many people actually have chosen the path of, let's call it, least risky, and would prefer to shut down and not have maybe great joy, but at least not have great pain, especially people who've been hurt. It's the natural reaction. It's like when someone, even if they fake it and they try to punch you a few times, so after a few times you're going to put your hand up, because it's a natural reaction to build up defenses when you feel hurt, or you've been hurt or vulnerable. So this theme of pain, suffering, joy, tears, and so on is extremely relevant, because all of us are in one of these few situations. We are either in a very happy mode or a very sad mode, or something in between. Sometimes it's a mix. So the Jewish calendar, in its wisdom, as Judaism in general, is very much aligned with human emotions and the human condition. And just as the human condition is not just a equilibrium that is constantly on one plane, human emotions, as we all know, we go through the fluctuations, the vicissitudes on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on an hourly basis, even on a minute-to-minute basis sometimes. And that's what life is about. Life is about change. In a balanced life, the change is hopefully not too extreme, so you're able to find some equilibrium in the ebb and flow. When it's more extreme, obviously it disturbs us and can disrupt our lives and so on. But at some point in life, we come to discover that life is made up of many, many different moods and modes and so on. Children naturally are born happy. They're naturally happy human beings, except a few exceptions. I'm not talking about someone that is necessarily due to whatever medical condition or genetic or whatever anomaly. Some children are born with, unfortunately, defects, or including even in their moods or attitudes. But generally speaking, in a healthy basis, a child is born just as a healthy child is born, is also born with a healthy attitude. And natural joy, natural exuberance, natural, let's call it, free abandon, with the comfort and courage to explore. That's the natural state of a child. And it's as life starts wearing us down, as life begins to evolve, we begin to see the ups and downs. We begin to experience the adults around us, their moods, and that's where children learn moods. And actually, I observed this last week. I was at my daughter lives in the West Coast, so as I always mentioned, I was observe my grandchildren as they develop. I'm trying to discover the mystery of how to continue to be innocent and beautiful and have all your dreams and hopes before you, as children do. So I so literally can see. This is something not uncommon. I'm just happen to see it, but everyone can observe it. You see how children begin to mimic their parents. And I just could not stop laughing when I saw my granddaughter just mimic when she got frustrated, exactly as my daughter gets frustrated. Certain words, it's like almost hilarious, because it's like literally, you see how impressionable the child is. So it's obvious that all of us pick up very quickly, and we're very sensitive. Our antennae, when children absorb everything, we are impressionable, and we pick up the moods of our parents. So it's not a you don't need to be a rocket scientist to hypothesize and know that the children learn moods from parents. They learn how to react to things. You see this all the time. You see how we react, the way we get angry or don't get angry, passive aggressive. All these things are mostly shaped by our earliest influences, which are our parents or our early educators, the adults around us. So the interesting experiment, of course, what would a child be like if it was not influenced by these factors? Obviously, it's an almost impossible experiment, because it wouldn't be influenced by parents, it would be influenced by something else. Just to leave a child on an island, hypothetically, and see what would happen, I don't know if it would be healthy either. Because a human being needs a social interaction, and we do need to learn from each other. But there's really no perfect situation, but you definitely see lives and homes where healthier homes, obviously you're going to have healthier children and healthier attitudes. But the context of what I was mentioning this all was the fluctuations of our good and bad moods, of being sad, of being happy, which every human being goes through, and children as well. Some of it is nature, but a lot of it is nurture based on what we see around us. What would make somebody sad? What would make a child sad? That's obviously the most pure form of sadness, before a child is shaped by adults. We know what makes us sad and happy, and that's what I'm going to discuss here this evening. As I said, this time of the year, this calendar, the Jewish calendar, the Hebrew calendar, lunar calendar, is not just a calendar. It is a profound psychological map that reflects the moods and the changes that we human beings go through. So literally every month of the Hebrew calendar has its mood, so to speak, has its atmosphere, has its environment. Every month has its energy, has its mazel, its sign, and has many other factors that shape the energy of that particular month. And not just the month, every day has its specific energy within that month. So generally speaking, the 2 months that symbolize the epitome of joy and its antithesis, or at least in our mind, antithesis, sadness, are the 2 months of Adar and Av. The month we just began, these 9 days are the first 9 days of Av, and its so-called alter ego is the month of Adar, the month of Purim, which is literally 6 months ago. Is it Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz? 5 months ago. And the Talmud actually equates the two and says, Kishem, just as when Av enters we diminish in joy, so too when Adar enters we increase in joy. That's a statement from the Talmud. So we have these 2 months. I'm not going to go through the whole cycle of the year because it's not relevant to our discussion, but just as a parenthetically, I wanted to make that point, and I have done it. I actually have an excellent series, if I may say so myself, that I addressed a few years ago that we have in CDs, which is the energy of the month. I went through all the 12, 13 months in Hebrew. This year, for example, is a leap year. There's two Adars. So that's like a discussion, as I said, the calendar as literally as a blueprint, I would say, as a template or a parallel to the human moods, to the human changes and fluctuations we go through. But what I'm emphasizing here is tonight is the discussion on this month of Av. So the Talmudic statement seems a little odd. Why would you equate these two experiences? It's one thing you can say, that in the month, just as in the month of Av, the month of Av we decrease in joy. The month of Adar we increase, but the Talmud says not just that. It says just as we decrease, we increase. It almost like diminishes the joy of Adar by equating it. Why do we have to remember in Adar that? Why do we derive the entire message of increasing joy in Adar from diminishing joy of Av? Clearly, the Talmud is equating the two in a certain way, and. If it was just an isolated statement, it's one thing, but there's a similar statement, which I believe I once discussed here, where it says in the laws of marriage, so we know that we make Sheva brachos. Sheva brachas are the 7 blessings said under the chuppah, by the ceremony. But it's also Sheva brachas. The custom is to have 7 days of celebration after the wedding date, which the first 7 days, it's like launching the marriage with joy. 7 days. So this, who instituted this custom? It says Moses instituted this custom. But here's the interesting thing: the statement in the Talmud, and also cited by Maimonides in his book of laws, he says like this: that just as Moses designated and instituted 7 days of grieving after death, Steve just went through these 7 days. He also designated 7 days of celebrating after a marriage. It's almost parallels the Talmudic statement. What is this bringing these two things together? Seems very strange. A person celebrating, thank God. Why do we have to be reminded in the moment of joy that there's a moment of sadness? We know. Unfortunately, most of us will go through in our lifetime some sadness. While you're celebrating, let somebody celebrate. Let the person be. So clearly there's some deeper message, of course. I remember when my grandmother passed away, my mother's mother. It was, I remember 4 years ago. It was a very surreal event. In the context, she passed away the same night of the marriage of her youngest son's son. And she was like at a deathbed. And she actually expired. She actually died literally after Sheva brachas finished in the wedding hall. And it was like, and she wasn't conscious. She wasn't like waiting or something. But that's what happened. So of course her son and the family members that were at the wedding, some of them knew and they were there. But exactly that happened. So while her son, my uncle that is, was sitting Shiva, and my mother and his siblings was sitting Shiva. And I remember I would come there every day, for the prayers and for being with my family. His wife would come in at night, dressed all in wedding garbs, basically, and celebrating because she went to the Sheva brachas of her son. This was exactly the same 7 days. As he was sitting Shiva, there was the Sheva brachas. And it was like, I wrote an article about it at the time because it struck me. It was like Moses, the Moses institution coming alive right there, just as. But in this case, it wasn't just as like 2 different times. It was exactly the same 7 days. And just witnessing it was quite, as I said, it was quite surreal, because you see death and life, beginning of life, marriage, love, and the antithesis, death, and all that it brings. Just a very stark contrast, glaring, impossible to ignore. And it brought to focus, issues we all deal with. As I said, most of us deal with it in different times. Mixing it together makes it much more complicated, obviously, and because the joy is not complete, and the sadness, obviously, is also mixed with feelings. So, what is the meaning behind this statement? And I think to be able to go there, we have to really analyze something that most of us don't even think about or talk about, and that is, what exactly is sadness after all? What makes people sad? Is it an objective thing? Like if 2 of us experience a certain thing, we should only have good occasions, but for whatever reason we experience some negative experience. Is it an objective thing that's automatic, both of us will be equally sad? Or is it a subjective experience? Or is it both? Some areas, sadness, obviously the loss of a parent. I lost my father. My mother always reminds us that when people say sorry for the loss of your father, she says, he's not lost, I know exactly where he is. So I don't know if that's the right expression, but let's put it this way: the passing of my father, is a similar thing. Every person who loses a parent passes on. It is an objective sadness. There's nobody that celebrates it, and if there is someone that celebrates it, it's usually for a very extreme reason. They tell that joke about a guy passed away who was really very cruel, and no one had anything good to say. So at his funeral, everybody was silent, and someone said, someone's got to get up and say something about him. But nobody wanted to get up because everyone, only whatever they had to say would not be very pleasant. So one guy gets up and says, this guy who passed away, you should all know that his brother was worse than he was. That was his eulogy. It's a joke. It's called gallows humor, whatever. So So there is a sadness that I would say is objective in the sense that all of us experience certain losses, we're going to experience sadness. But how we express sadness is definitely different from one to the other. You see, some people are devastated absolutely by tragedy. They literally cannot come to themselves. They sometimes their entire lives change forever. I mean, I would say it changes everybody, but I'm talking about functionality. Others, same type of loss, and are able to weather it, are able to grow through it even. You see it in the Holocaust and stuff like that. And the same question can be asked, of course, about happiness. What is happiness? So we all like to say we'd like to be happy. You know, many people, you ask them, what's their mission statement in life? To be a happy human being. Obviously, it's, if you think about it, it is as vague and meaningless in a way. It's as equivalent of saying that the mission statement of a business is to make money. Yeah, obviously every business is supposed to make money. The mission statement, however, is how you're going to uniquely do it your way. Not just the general. Happiness is definitely an aspire to state. But what exactly is happiness if we really dissect it? So some may wonder, why do we have to dissect it? You know, let's just be happy and that's it. You dissect it because it helps you understand yourself. Helps you understand what makes you happy. Are you happy from the right things? And also helps you cope in times of sadness, because if you could understand it maybe in a new way, in a fresh way, it could help us deal with our own emotions in new ways. So I think this time of year is a perfect time, and it's meant for this purpose. As I said, the calendar is meant to be aligned. You know, God gave us this calendar in order to give us, so to speak, a template, a backdrop, by which we can gauge and measure and learn about our own emotions. So Jews never back off. It's not just we're only around when things. The calendar is not just a calendar of celebration. Yes, there are months of holidays, Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. As I said, Adar, the month of Purim. There's Passover. There's plenty of celebrating. But then there's also the 3 weeks, the 9 days, this period in time. And it's actually what makes us stronger as human beings is when you face the full spectrum of human life. To tell somebody there's only going to be good days is simply wrong. It's not true. This world is not that way. So understanding and facing head on your enemy, so to speak, and learning that you don't get killed by it, you don't destroy by it, as they say, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. In a way, we can come away with deeper strength in a period like this, because we are able to take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and look at this thing called sadness, this thing called tears, sadness, we cry. So it's much deeper than just remembering the temple that was destroyed thousands of years ago. It's about us right now. We are honoring, in this period, all the losses of life, whether it's physical losses of close people in our lives, whether it's emotional, whether it's psychological, spiritual. I mean, who of us has not had some dream shattered, some promise broken, some aspiration unfulfilled? All of us have that. You know, hopefully not more than necessary. But every one of us has experienced some form of loss. And therefore addressing it is not something to be afraid of. We look at it. Jewish people especially have seen the abyss many times, and they came out stronger. It's interesting in the Bible, in the Torah, when it talks about the bondage and the pain and the suffering, the oppression of the Jews in Egypt, it says expression, Kisher Yana Esam Kein Yirba V'chein Yifritz. In direct proportion as they were oppressed, they grew and they flourished, because they learned the secret of transforming tears into growth. So that doesn't mean we welcome tears and we welcome sadness, but when it does come, not only are we not afraid of it, we know how to transform it. And it's also interesting that this period in time, if you look in the prophets, Zechariah and other prophets, cited by Maimonides in the laws of fasting, where he talks about these days, Tisha B'Av, 17th of Tammuz, the different 4 main fasts that we fast throughout the year for sad things. So we have the 10th of Tevis, the 17th of Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, and Sam Gedalia, the day after Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur is obviously a different type of fasting for different purposes, not because of destruction or loss. On the contrary, there it's because we're emulating, trying to be more divine, more angelic, and it's more because of a spirituality of the day. And then, of course, there's the Tainas Esther, the fast of Esther, which is also for because of the decree. But so he concludes and he cites Zechariah and says these words: Yehavchu Yomim Elu. And this is actually a blessing that you'll hear many people say during this day. Yehavchu Yomim Elu May these days be transformed. Word is transformed. L'sasin l'simcha, l'yom tovim. That from a yogin l'simcha, from sadness to joy, from pain to a holiday. So it's not enough just to obliterate these days and just say no more sadness, no more pain. It's about transformation. The word is Yehavchu. In Hebrew, Yehavchu means transformation. To redeem the pain, because then, I won't say the words that it makes it worth it, but it was not in vain. Because maybe one of the worst things is knowing that you suffered in vain. To know that you've been hurt, and the hurt in some way propels you to another place, is a very powerful healing factor. And it's not just actually with pain, it's with everything in life. Real healing from whatever it is that we go through, wounds and so on, is far, far greater when we discover that whatever it is that hurt us can end up making us stronger. This is also the concept, the theory behind homeopathy and the theory behind even antibiotics. By taking the poison, the toxin, and turning it into a healing agent. So psychologically, this is definitely true. I've talked about this many times here, about how you can take past experiences, negative experiences, and turn them into positive ones. Ones where your unique experiences that one has experienced, let's say in pain or in loss, teaches you things that other people who have not had that can never understand. Which one, first of all, makes you stronger and also helps you teach others, and it can help you look at life in a new way. But it's a process. It doesn't happen automatically. This requires effort. So this is all part of the work required, and the work that these days teach us about. And to go back to then, the question, of course, then is, what is exactly happiness and sadness? To put it in, let's say, in more specific terms, is happiness a state of being, a noun, or is it a verb? To be happy. I don't mean that in a grammatical sense, I mean in an experiential sense. What's the difference between a verb and a noun? A happy person, you can define is happy. He or she is happy when they're experiencing something that's causing them to be happy. When they're asleep, for example, or when they're 24/7, can you say this person's a happy person? If it's a verb, it's only when it's a state of action. It's a state of it's only happening when it happens. If it's a noun, a state of being, like for example, to say I am a human being is not a verb, it's a noun. You're a human being whether you're asleep or awake. You're a human being 24/7, no matter what you're doing. It's a state of being. So is happiness a state of being, or is it a verb? Most people would answer a verb. I've done my research. I know the response. I'm not saying you would able to answer that, but most people say it's a verb because that's what we're accustomed. In our culture, happiness is a verb. You go to a store. Many people, for example, when they're sad, actually go shopping. Shopping is a great escape. Because you buy something for yourself. I'm not even saying it's necessarily a negative thing. If it's not anything that's obviously obsessive or out of control, is always going to be problematic. But the idea of going and buying something for yourself, make yourself feel better. Go getting a massage, go exercise. These are things that are known to be catalysts for happiness. Now what does that mean for happiness? Is it lasting happiness? Is it momentary? But it's a change of pace. It's also something. So many people, fine, it could be a form of escapism, it could even be temporary. This includes food, this includes entertainment, includes romance, sexuality. These are many of the forces and many others that each of us find ways to make ourselves feel happy. So in that context, which is probably the most obvious interpretation of happiness, happiness essentially is a result or a product of some activity. Activity or object or experience. So something that you do or something that you own or something you acquire that causes you to be happy. Again, this can be a happiness that lasts short, it can be happy that lasts long term. That's a definition that is very common. But is it an accurate definition? So let's go to the contrast of that, and is sadness. So then sadness is the same definition. When you're deprived of something that you want that will make you happy. So for example, whatever it is that would cause you to be happy, if you're not given that, you're not getting what you think you need or desire, you're going to be sad. You're missing something. And that deprivation causes you to be sad. So that would be the verb. The verb you will, whatever, is that a word? verbiage. No, there's the verb, the action form of happiness. Obviously, you could all assume that since I'm mentioning it this way, I'm leading up to that. This is not what happiness is, but I'll spell it out. So then, and by no means am I exhausting this. I'm not going to go through every possible theory. I'm sure if you type happiness in Google, well, you probably won't even get any theories. You'll just get products that they're trying to sell you. So that'll probably be the first 100, because I'm sure happiness is one of the words that are really bought. Those ad words, happy. Everyone looks. I need happiness. On computer you're completely open because nobody's watching. You just write, I need happiness, and give me some happiness. It's really interesting. I didn't really test it. It would be interesting what the Google response would be, which is usually reflective of most people's what most people would respond to. Hope it's not totally pornographic. That's the only thing, But I'm sure it's more object-oriented and purchase-oriented than it is a definition. Okay, probably the Wikipedia will be first. They'll just give you the definition of it. But again, I'm not going through a scientific. This isn't an exhaustive seminar on happiness. It's just a point of context. What is the Jewish or Torah view on happiness? So clearly, it's not about action. It's about a state of being. Now, what I mean by that, it doesn't mean either you have it or you don't have it. It means the definition of happiness is not based on a result or a product of something else. It's something that we all have, our birthright. I mentioned earlier, children are naturally happy. When I say they're naturally happy, let me clarify. Happy doesn't mean they're laughing all the time. That's not what the word happy means. It means they're naturally content. There's a certain sense of fulfillment. They don't feel missing something. Now you'll say, what about a child who's hungry or sees a toy he wants and doesn't get it? Look how long that sadness lasts. Because a child has a natural state of being, which I'll discuss more at length soon. But let's context happiness. Let's go to the Torah says, a mitzvah, ivdus Hashem b'simcha. You should serve God with simcha, with joy. Tachas asher lo yavadata Hashem elokecha b'simcha v'tuv levav is a verse in the Torah. That because you have not served God with joy, there are certain consequences. So what is the meaning? Can you really command someone to serve with joy? Either you're happy or not happy. So clearly there's some meaning here. Actually, you could even make the argument that this is an argument for being a verb, for being objective. The commandment is do something that will cause you to have joy. You can't just tell somebody be happy. So instead, you just tell somebody do things that will make you happy. But in truth, that's not at all the case. Because there's also a statement, Teiv Lev Mishta Tamid. You look at the Shulchan Aruch, you all know what Shulchan Aruch is? It's a code of Jewish law. It's essentially a codification of all the Talmudic literature and all the literature from Talmud almost to modern times that is structured in a form of a code. Without all the explanations, that's the code of Jewish law, the laws of Shabbos, the laws of kosher, the laws of ethics, the laws of prayer, and so on. So the code of Jewish law is structured into 4 books, 4 sections actually: Orach Chaim, Yeridei, Even Ezer, and what's missing? Choshen Mishpat. Those are the 4 sections. So the first section, Orach Chaim, which deals mostly with Orach Chaim, literally means the path of life, way of life. So the end of it concludes actually with halacha Teiv Lev Mishta Tamid. A person should always be happy and joyous. That's clearly a sign of a state of being. That means even Tisha B'Av. It doesn't say anywhere that there's 364 days a year you should be joyous and one day not. It doesn't say that. This statement of being happy is all year round and all day long and all night long. So what is the meaning of it? The answer is the meaning of this type of joy and happiness is this definition. Happiness is when a soul feels that it's fulfilling its purpose. Or to put it in more psychological terms, when you know that what you're doing is what you should be doing right now in this place, that creates happiness within. Completely different definition, has nothing to do with objects. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even have anything to do with smiling. A person like that can be completely happy and they don't have to be necessarily expressing it. So the definition again is like this, that we have a body and a soul. A body on its own, obviously, God forbid, is a corpse. A soul is the spirit within us, and when that spirit senses and feels that it's doing, and it's doing what it should be doing, it will naturally be happy. Or to put it to maybe in better terms, it will be aligned with itself, and therefore it is a natural state of contentment, fulfillment. This doesn't mean that a soul doesn't have angst and doesn't want more. But there's a big difference. I discussed this, I believe, last week or a few weeks ago. There's a big difference between angst and anxiety. You know, a healthy angst, every one of us needs to aspire to something, to dream. And have even a certain measure of tension until we acquire until we resolve that tension. Anxiety is when the angst or the need becomes so obsessive or so powerful that it overwhelms us, demoralizes us. So the idea of a soul being content doesn't mean no motivation. It means, however, that there's a sense of fulfillment because you're doing what you should be doing. And sadness is the antithesis of that. It's when you're not doing what you should be doing. Now the truth is, each of us, there are times when all of us can relate to this. Even though we may not see this definition all the time because we have become object-oriented, and we've been trained and programmed and manipulated into thinking that objects can change our moods. They can, on a temporary level and a superficial level, but they never change the internal state of being, who you are. But all of us can relate to, at times, that when you're in a place, and so this sometimes happens completely unexpected, you come to a party or an event, or you meet somebody, you just feel you belong. You can be in front of beautiful nature. There's a sense of belonging, and there's always a sense of, we'll call it inner harmony, or tranquility, inner peace. Now, does it last? There's another story. But there's a moment like that. And then there's also the opposite. You go into certain environments, especially chaotic, tense, and you feel tense. Tension around you will cause you to be tense. Sometimes you sense even danger. But let's not even go that far. Just a sense of dissonance, of not belonging, like, something's wrong. And this can be the moods of people. It's called a vibe. Now, all this we all have experiences of. What we don't have experience of is how do you control it? Can you trigger it? Can you initiate it? Can you stop it when it happens? Or are you just a victim or a product of what happens around us? As I said, we've been trained to think in terms of what we call particle type of thinking. Moment to moment to moment. Something's isn't working well, go find a way to fix it. Go buy something. Go do something. I'm not suggesting all that is wrong, but if it's only that, you're missing the key thing, which is how do you create it from within, generate it from within. So as we'll soon discuss, there's no question there are activities and objects that can trigger something within, but they are a catalyst then. But if they become the replacement, the crutch, the so-called, this is the object that will give you gratification, then there's a big trouble. There's big trouble. Maybe one of the best and easiest examples is visual entertainment. And I don't even mean necessarily anything that's inappropriate. Television, internet. Visual specifically I'm mentioning, because it's the power of the visual, the hypnotic power of the visual, captures us, captures our attention. There's no one that is immune to it. Because visual is very powerful. What you see affects you. And you see the power of television. You see the power of people living their lives through the soap operas, through the lives of others. And you don't even realize that it's not you. You almost like, you get excited as much as they are. And it's like almost the drama of life is played out on a stage. In a way, it deflects from having to deal with it yourself. Now, I'm not suggesting I'm not here fire and brimstone that entertainment is a bad thing, technology. That's not where I'm coming from. But it's important to know how much we've been programmed, how much we've been controlled in this setting. That's why when we are deprived of it, we go off to the woods for a month. A month is a lot, a week, and you can't access all those electric lines, and no texting and no iPhones and mobile and so on. It's very disconcerting for some. At some point you come to realize that that's the real you. But we're so addicted, and you look at it almost, okay, you know what, I'm glad it was a very nice experience, but I'm glad I'm back home, type of thing. So people have that because we are absolutely addicted. Now this per se doesn't mean it's bad, but it means it controls our lives. And it definitely replaces how one finds natural happiness. I've seen people who never saw television in their lives. In my life, I've seen people like that. I know, you hear in the newspapers, it's usually dismissed as some type of like religious prudes who are completely detached. No, I'm talking about sophisticated, evolved people. I'm not talking, there are idiots also, but that's another story. I'm talking about people extremely sophisticated. You have a conversation. Their stimulation is completely from within. From books, from ideas, from human beings, from children and family. They're extremely healthy human beings. And I've seen it. Especially from the last generation, primarily, obviously. And it's amazing to see because you see a purity of thought that is really not influenced by modern culture, by the media. Now, we look at that almost as saying, what do you mean? They don't read the New York Times every day? How do they know what's going on and stuff like that? I guess we're at the age at this point that we realize that the New York Times is not like the thing that changes, that creates, is like the next step of human evolution, exactly. But it's hard to imagine because we live in a world where we are plugged in. We're not unplugged, so to speak, and we're plugged into the matrix, and we're affected by it, and we affect it all the time. So to go back to this definition, to know that where you are is where you should be, is the root of happiness, and the opposite is the root of sadness, is a whole other way of looking at things. Then the question, of course, is where should I be? What should I do to be in that place? And if I'm not there, can I really find and create an artificial happiness that will replace and compensate for that? Now, most of us do. Maybe we're not, the question isn't posed quite the way I just posed it, but most of us do because, there's a need inside the heart and soul that wants to be content, wants to be fulfilled. So, we're here, a group of people, every one of us has a different story. So I cannot go through and just say, here's the way to approach it. Each of us has to ask this question. What really makes you content? Now, some of us may not even have an answer to that, which is also fine. It's at least it's a good beginning. The beginning that you don't know it all, and we don't know it all. But to be able to answer that question really comes down to understanding your whole life and what you really do that keeps you fulfilled. Could you really see yourself unplugging from all objects and all technology and all magazines and everything that is outer stimulation and just be able to generate from within? Most of us cannot see that happening. And I wouldn't even suggest it to go cold turkey like that. But it doesn't hurt to experiment and see really what is absolutely necessary or what you think is necessary and what's not. So going back to the child now. Look at children, and we all have observed this, I'm sure. And remember, each of us has been a child once, believe it or not, right? We were once crawling around on all fours, exploring the world with, as I said, free abandon, with no hesitation. And you see a child just has internal stimulation. You leave a young child around, they're not going to start clamoring. I mean, of course, if they're hungry or they need something physical for their own survival, sleep or food or drink, it's one thing. But for stimulation, I know you say, well, what about kids? They always want to have, like my granddaughter is obsessed with painting. She always wants paint. She's painting now. She's creating beautiful art. It's called modern art. But I would submit that, yes, at some age, you begin looking for tools or other things to express. But I look at another grandchild of mine, much younger, and he doesn't need anything. He makes sure everything in the room becomes his toy. He gets it and then tears it apart, or whatever it is. And you see the natural state of a child is that definitely, clearly, it's not the object that's stimulating the child. It's the stimulation from within that's looking for adventure, basically. Something happens to us, I don't know what age, I guess it takes time, that something begins to deaden. Something begins to die. And the stimulation stops coming from within and becomes more from without. So look, if you think of it like in a ratio form, I would say the younger the child, the more it's from within and less from without. I mean, it generates it without. Obviously, a newborn it's hard to really see because we don't know what's going on in the newborn's mind and heart, you know. But definitely the newborn takes things in, vision, sight, sees its mother, its father. You put a toy, you know, there's no question newborn is influenced. But there's a lot going on. The child is thinking. Any way a child thinks. We don't really know because we can't communicate with that child. So I would say, if you would put it in a mathematical formula, as the years roll on, the stimulation becomes less from within and more from without. Up to a point where I guess it's almost from without. And then you expect the object outside to stimulate the activity within, the happiness within. Now, how healthy is this? You know, I would submit it's very unhealthy, actually. And again, I'm not even talking about negative. I'm not talking about bad stimulation or bad things or bad experiences or inappropriate behavior. Just the idea that what happened to your engine? What happened to your internal engine? What happened to the natural curiosity, the natural sense of adventure, enchantment, and so on? Now, I have no question, because I've seen this myself, and I've seen it in adults like our age, that you can spark this. There are ways to get to that place. And I have no doubt that Judaism, a big part of Judaism is to help us get there. Sometimes our children help us get there, because they bring that back out of us. It's like a second life, so to speak. You could experience that enchantment through them. But we could also experience it in our own minds. You know, some people talk about the genius of Steven Spielberg and legacy that he leaves, that in the way he sparked that, he touched that part in so many people. The child within. In his earlier films, I guess, primarily. Whether you agree or don't agree with that, but there's a power to that. I would also submit, for example, that when we're touched by music, and by love, and by other so-called intimate experiences, well, we're really that's really sparking something that was there, like from our childhood. Because love has that same type of experience. It's fresh, it's new, it's surprising, it's unexpected. Until, of course, the adult tools come into play, and that's when the control starts, and you want to make sure that everything is maneuvered properly. But there's an element of enchantment in it that's always, of course, earlier on, that is very reminiscent of what I'm describing. Judaism, in essence, is trying in every possible way, in its 613-step program, trying to ignite that spirit within us. Unfortunately, religion has been rendered dogmatic, mechanical. So just do a bunch of activities. But if a Shabbos, if a Seder table, even a Tisha B'Av, which I'll soon discuss, were done with the soul that it was intended, it is a force, an agent of life and adventure. Because in Jewish mysticism, there's a fundamental concept that, and anyone familiar a little with quantum mechanics, new physics can relate to this. Life is not, the world that we see it is not an inanimate world. It's a dynamic universe. Everything is bubbling, is pulsating with energy. Everything. Not just humans, animals, vegetable world, even the inanimate mineral world. Everything. Except it's beneath the surface. It's nature. What we call nature, teva in Hebrew, hateva, is the gematria of Elohim. Hateva is like compared to the water cover. When you look at an ocean, the sea cover, and if we had no cameras, and you never swam underwater, we had no clue what's going on brimming under the surface. You know, once in a while we'd see a dolphin or fish or a whale pop its head out. But what would we know of what's going on beneath? We'd say there's probably a few creatures there. Because the sea cover has that type of deceptive ability to completely hide and conceal the life that's under the water. What do we know today? The exact opposite is the case. There's much more life underwater than there is on land. More species, more mystery, more activity, more volcanoes and earthquakes, and so on. Besides the fact that 2/3 of the earth is covered in water, but besides that, simply what's going on beneath there there are depths of the oceans that we have yet to uncover. We know more about 1 million miles outer space than we knew about something that's just a few miles away, 7 miles under the water. So the mystics call the water, the sea, the hidden worlds, and land, the revealed worlds. In psychological terms, land is compared to the conscious life. C is compared to the unconscious life. So what's going on in your unconscious? So initially you'd think, you want to share? Oh, okay. Initially you'd think the unconscious has less activity going on than the conscious mind. But based on the C example, it's absolutely not true. You could be thinking consciously one thought right now, but your unconscious mind has millions of thoughts that you're not conscious of until you focus on it. The memories that we have in our lives. As I said, looking at children, I look at my grandchildren, as cute as they are, they won't remember their lives. That period in their life, the cutest time of life, you never remember. Our first memories begin when we're around 3 years old. So like the first 3 years, which is like that beautiful part, the parents will remember. The children won't even remember. That's how not conscious they are of themselves. I guess when you start becoming self-conscious, you start remembering things. It's just, huh?
There are a lot of favorable memories too.
There are? Favorable.
Well,
You said favorable? Is that the word you said?
favorable.
Oh.
Before they can speak or express.
No, I'm sure. My earliest memory is around when I was 3. Anybody has earlier? You have what age?
Probably with the looks.
Okay.
And it was verified when my father told me that's what the room looked like. So
But it's not a lot of memories. It's
it's visual memories and actions of people.
Okay. Well, you should know it's not so common.
I do.
Okay, so you're an uncommon woman. Fine. We all are unique in this world, I'm sure. You want to share? You
Yes,
said,
my earliest memory.
Stephen, make sure you could share this in public, okay?
My earliest memory is of my mother lying in the couch.
Really? How old were you?
I just 4 or 5.
4 or 5. Okay, fine. Some people say they don't even remember what happened yesterday. That's another thing. Anyway, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want to share something that you mentioned Steven Spielberg, and then you're talking about memories. I was one of the people who did the interviews for the Holocaust Project for Spielberg.
Oh.
And I did it in New York and California. And basically, you also want to get a moment of tremendous passion or tears. You want something very strong. And what I found is, whether the person was religious or not religious, if I would just casually say, so what's the niggin your father sang Friday night? What's the niggin? And almost invariably, there would be either songs, somebody would start crying. That's not, I wanted them to cry, but I knew that would evoke, and it was the music and that memory.
Right.
So,
Well, it's a theme I talk about quite often here. Music and song is no question is a language of children and souls. And when we say resonance, song resonates, is because it is a language that's within our souls, embedded from even before birth. Yeah, because that's also part of the natural joy and happiness. So let's go back to what I was talking about here. Was that something deadens, something begins to, harden, as our arteries harden. The Rabbeinu Bachai says, Tinuk mishanelad maskelis yavish. A child from birth begins to dry up. Exact words he used. Obviously it doesn't dry up, meaning begins to age. So aging process does not begin when you're 40, 50, 60, when you need reading glasses or you see the first wrinkles or white hair. I don't want to depress anybody. It begins the moment you're born, because obviously if you didn't have the first 10 years of your life, you wouldn't have the next 10. So aging begins immediately. In the most morbid way you could say, we begin dying the moment we're born. But life is about life, chayim. So how do we connect to the life force that keeps us alive? So I said there's a pulsating energy within all of existence. We say it every day in the prayer. We say, "Amachadish b'tuvei b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereishis." God renews existence every moment anew, every day, every moment anew. So there's a concept, a philosophical, mystical concept, which is elaborated upon by the Baal Shem Tov. You can look it up in the book of Tanya, section 2, Sharich Emunah, where he talks about that every moment there's a renewal of life in all of us. So even though we look like what we looked like a second ago, this table looks like what it looked like a moment ago, it is constantly being renewed, but it's renewed in the shape and form as it was a moment before. And he says even further that that God's word is always keeping heaven alive and earth and every object. And if for a moment God would stop breathing or stop willing existence, it would all disappear. So in other words, life is a breath, a continuous pulsating force of energy that has to be willed into existence. It's not the status quo, it's the other way around, that it exists and you have to figure out how to destroy it. They tell the story or the analogy of a Hasidic mystic meeting a philosopher, and they were discussing, or a Talmudic master who did not know the mystical side of things, and they were discussing, the debate was, question was asked, if God wanted to destroy the universe, how would he do it? So the biblical expert, the Talmudic expert said, well, we have a precedent. First he'd bring a flood, then he would bring a fire, and then he would basically take all the ashes and the remnants and just scatter them all over, everything would cease to be. Obviously, you don't need to be a scientist to know it doesn't cease to be, it just turns matter into energy, and you can't actually destroy anything in this world, really. Only its shape and form. And the Hasidic master said, one word, if God wanted to destroy the universe, he would do one thing, nothing. He would cease to will. Because it's not that existence is here and we have to figure out how to break it. That's for humans. It needs to be willed into being. Now this is a big topic, which I don't want to go into at length here, but it's extremely relevant in a very personal way, which is a person who can connect, so to speak, plug in to that source of life that is constantly being renewed, does not need outer stimulation. Because the energy is there. And we have tastes of this. You know when we have a taste of this? When you fall in love with somebody in a healthy way. That moment, suddenly new life comes into you. Where does it come from? Is it just the person? The person triggered something that's inside of you. Something that may have been dormant for a long time. We have experiences of it when we hear songs and music, talk about music. It may not last long, but the moment, you can be completely in a moment, as I said, a contentment, because your soul knows exactly that this is where it needs to be right now. But then we have another world, which is the crust, as I said, the sea cover, that hides all this. And as we grow from children to adults, children naturally gravitate in that inner dimension. But as we grow into adults, we suddenly travel to the outer layers. And on the outer layer, things are inanimate. And you could say, I'm bored. What do I do now? What's going to give me happiness? How am I going to get stimulated? And you start looking for things on the surface level of existence that will stimulate you. Sometimes it pierces internally and also brings something out from within. But most often it's usually instant gratification that lasts like what we call sugar-coated experiences. It lasts as much as sugar lasts. So from this context, the word happiness then is absolutely a noun. It's a state of being. However, the question is, how do we reach that state of being? So here's the twist, that in these 9 days, in these sad times, interestingly, you can discover the secret to happiness more than you can even in the month of Adar. And that will explain the Talmud that I asked earlier. Kashem, the equation of sadness to happiness and vice versa. If happiness means that you're where you should be and your soul is doing what it should be doing, then who says that sadness is a contradiction to happiness? That whole concept, which seems like to us a paradox, sad and happy seem like antonyms. They're opposites. Who said? If what is required right now in your life is to be sensitive and cry for a loss or for something, then your soul is content with that. Doesn't mean it's happy in the sense where you're celebrating and dancing, but it means you're doing what you should be doing that moment. So let's say, God forbid, you walk out the street and you see a child lost. You see someone hurt. So you can choose and say, listen, I'm not in the mood of being bad mood right now. I'm not going to look that way. I'm going to ignore this. And go find myself some entertainment to keep me happy. I have enough bad things in my life. I don't get depressed. A person that does that is fundamentally, they can absolutely escape, but that doesn't cause you to be happy. It meant you basically went into denial. You're ignoring another human being. If you're a healthy human being, one day you're going to be haunted by that. That how could you have passed by when somebody may have needed you? And if you do engage with that person, Yes, you may have to see sadness. You may even become sad, but you've done the right thing. You were sensitive for another person. And their soul becomes content from that. Now, of course, we all hope for the day where we never need, our sensitivity should only be about good things, but we don't live in a world like that yet. So here's the beauty of Jewish psychology. That actually, I would say, is one of the secrets of why we're here as a people after thousands of years. Because it wasn't just that we knew how to survive through pain. We knew how pain is also part of the process of joy. It's a cycle. It's part of one journey. It's not two journeys. And it's not about... Obviously, we do everything possible to minimize or to get rid of any cause of pain. But if we're forced in the situation, it's not about ignoring it and saying, you know what, I deny it. It's about taking it on and dealing with it. So here we have the custom by a chuppah, by a wedding ceremony, under the chuppah, under the canopy, at the end of every ceremony, the custom to break a glass. Bring a glass, wrapped up, the chassan, the groom, steps on it. Yeah, it's the men that do the breaking, not the women. Basically, that's the... But the question is why do we break a glass? So the general reason is commemorates what we commemorate in these 9 days. On Tisha B'Av, the destruction of the temple. So it's like commemorating, the break is a remember of that something that the temple was destroyed. So here's the obvious question. A chuppah is probably the highest point of a person's life. You know, the wars begin afterwards usually. The battles. What do they say? Like the difference between the teacher asks the child, what's the difference between an engagement and a battle, right? The battle begins after the chuppah, essentially. So at the high point of a couple's life, why the need to insist that they have to remind themselves of a sad event of sadness? And we have a Tisha B'Av for that. There's always the next day. There's always another time. Now why? You know, as I said earlier, unfortunately we're going to experience some sadness in our lives. So we have to shove it down someone's throat right at the high point. Let people celebrate when they're celebrating, and inevitably when the other type of experience comes around, they'll have to deal with it. So it's very similar to what I said before, the two Talmudic statements. One that equates of and other, that says kishem. Just as we diminish in joy in this month of, we increase in joy in other. Again, why compare these two? Why kishem? You have to remember, in Purim Adar, you have to know that you derive joy of other from the diminishing of joy in of. Why bring the two together? And the same thing when it says Moses tikkun, he designated, he instituted the two customs also in one sentence. He instituted 7 days of mishta after a wedding, 7 Sheva brachas, and 7 days of grieving and mourning after a death. And said again the same terms. Why bring the two together? Like, why do we break the glass under the chuppah? And the answer is both simple but brilliant, profound, especially psychologically. The reason is, one of the reasons, is because in your height of joy, if you're not sensitive to the fact that somebody in this world may not be so happy, you're not sensitive to the fact that we still live in a broken world, and there was a temple that was destroyed, and it wasn't just a building, it was a window that closed between heaven and earth. If you're not sensitive to that, then your joy is a very narcissistic, selfish joy, and it means not real completely. So the fact that in the highest moment of joy, we have the humility, we have the presence of mind to stop, to pause, and to remember there may be someone that's broken, doesn't diminish your joy. It makes it real. It means that you're a sensitive human being. And a step further, you can add that when you remember the breaks in this world, in your height of joy, God forbid the moment you once experienced a break, you will be remembered as well. You'll see psychologically, people who are completely consumed with their own feelings, it works both ways. When they're completely consumed with joy, and they see nothing else except themselves, then when there's some, God forbid, tragedy strikes, they also see nothing else but themselves, and they're completely devastated. The beauty is that even in the highest point of joy, you reserve 1%, not about me, but there's others, so that when you, God forbid, suffer in some way, it's also not going to be 100%, there'll be room for some relief. Think about it. This is like it's absolutely brilliant concept, because it teaches us that life is cycles. That doesn't mean when you're at the height of joy we suddenly sit down and start grieving, God forbid. It just means do not do anything 100%. There's a bigger world. We're dependent on each other. It's a lesson of the real message of life, that life is a journey. And just like the wheel turns, and sometimes you're on top, the wheel will continue to turn. And even when you're on the bottom, you know that the wheel continues. The Baal Shem Tov gave an example for this. He called it, in Yiddish there's a word called Schwindeltrepp. Schwindeltrepp is a Yiddish translation. In English would be spiral staircase. However, the Yiddish word schwindel means more than spiral. Schwindel means swindle, like a swindler. Deception. Why? Why are they deceiving steps? Because when you see regular steps, here we have a demonstration. You can just imagine it. So you see yourself climbing, and you see every step you go, you get closer to the destination. And you could even see the destination, if it's not millions of steps. In a spiral staircase, which of course is built, besides for architectural purposes, it also can save space. You climb, and as you climb, you have to continuously make circles and turn 180, 360 degrees. But while you're doing it, you're climbing higher. So it's deceptive in the sense that you could deceive yourself because you turn your back completely to the destination. And you could think, I'm not closer. As a matter of fact, the last moment before you reach the pinnacle, the top, you have to make one final turn. And that final turn, your back is completely turned to the destination. You can convince yourself, deceive yourself into thinking that you're not there. And many people stop right there, they don't see it through. So his example is in life, that's life. There are times as you work hard, you sometimes feel you're not getting anywhere. And we should know that life is like a spiral staircase. It's not like the straight staircase. Sometimes the moments that right before revelation, right before the dawn, as they say, is the darkest. So right before the final destination is that final turn. So it's swindling steps, Schwindeltrepp. It swindles, it deceives you into thinking that you're not getting anywhere, you're not succeeding. Now obviously you need to have perhaps objective consultation to determine whether you're actually not getting anywhere or you are getting somewhere. Because the fact is that sometimes we are doing things that are not getting us anywhere. So this isn't a saying that everything you do is always, sometimes it's actually going backwards. I had a guy, I remember in yeshiva, when we first learned how to drive, this guy was a maniac. He used to drive like a maniac. So he once took me home and he decided that he has to cut everybody and stuff like that. So we coined a line about him that the faster he goes, the more backwards he gets. Some people actually are working backwards. But that's another story. That's, I don't know what the Baal Shem Tov would call such a staircase. That's a staircase going backwards while you think you're going frontwards. So essentially then the 9 days is really an exercise into understanding the spiral staircase. And this is why it says that the greatest holiday of all, says the Medrash, will be Tisha B'Av. When the day comes that it will be revealed for what it really was. So yes, it's the saddest day, but it's also the happiest day in essence. Right now we only see the sad shell. We don't see the bigger picture. So, why? Because Tisha B'Av reflects more than any other day of the year the reality of life. That life, as we know it, is cruel, is broken, hurtful. What day in the year reflects that most? So on Purim, it reflects perhaps the world the way it's supposed to be. The inner joy we have, the deeper joy, and there's no question that's a critical part of the experience. But Tisha B'Av teaches us how the world is, without any gloves. And therefore we sit Shiva literally, we dim the lights, fast day, it's a sad day. Now most of us perhaps who know about it, many people just do it mechanically. They look in the calendar, okay, Tisha B'Av, time to eat an egg, and time to stop eating at some point, go to synagogue and say the particular Eicha, Kinus, stuff like that. But those more in touch with the inner rhythms know that Tisha B'Av is a reflection of all breaks in life. When we cry in Tisha B'Av, we're crying for every person who suffers. It's not just we cry for the Holocaust, we cry for the losses in the past and also in our own time. We cry for a dissonance and a separation between God and existence. that in some way this world is not aligned to its purpose. That's sadness. When we know that you're not doing what you should be doing. And very few of us are aligned with that purpose. So it's a sadness. And that sadness is actually, I would submit, the healthiest thing, because you're aware. You're not deceiving yourself. So obviously, you could argue that if that's the case, we should have Tisha B'Av all year round. It would be very reflective. Because that's not the point. The point is to repair the world. It's not the point to stay there. One day in the year, we have to be reminded of what reality is like. And this is not a depressing thought. It's just stating reality as it exists. They say, Henry Kissinger writes in his memoirs, that the night that President Nixon resigned because of Watergate, anybody old enough to remember that? Stephen, you keep volunteering. What are you, like, 35 years old? Stephen. Okay. Good. So Henry Kissinger writes that the night that Nixon resigned, so they prayed, they got on their knees, and Nixon asked them to pray. It was easier for Nixon to pray than for the Jew Kissinger to pray. That's what he writes. But then afterwards, this is what he says. He says when Nixon walked out, he was going to make the announcement or sign the papers, whatever it was, sign his letter of resignation. So he stopped by in the hall in the White House. There's this big portrait of John F. Kennedy, like in a pensive type of pondering mode. It's a famous portrait. You see him sitting on a chair with his head down, like his hand on his chin. It's a painting, and it's a very quite dramatic painting. So he says that Nixon stopped by the painting and muttered the following. He said, "They love you because you remind them of who they want to be. They hate me because I remind them of who they are." So that's an interesting statement. Nixon was not accused of being stupid, and it's interesting because it mirrors a certain concept of a line that the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi, said once about Judaism, about Chassidus. He said, the Torah, that it teaches you how small you are and how great you can become. There are people who know how small they are. That's all they know. And they constantly beat themselves up, or they've been beaten up by others, reminding them how little they accomplished, how they shouldn't get their hopes too high. I always mention, we always have people on our Rolodex. You rest assured, if you get too enthusiastic, call them up and they'll make sure to put you back in your place and throw cold water. So there are people like that. And you could say they're very honest, they're so small in their own eyes. Then there are people the other way, with grandiose dreams, we call illusions of grandeur, and just know how great they can become. There's also another category who think they already became that, but I'm not even going there. They think they know how great they can become, and they don't know how small they are. So both are maybe true, but if you don't have them together, there's going to be a distortion. When you teach, for example, a student painting, art, or music, even a beginner, a good teacher will teach the beginner and show the child or the novice, show what the great masters accomplished, whether it's in art or music. You could say, what's the point? You see what the great masters have done. It's not very motivating, because you say, I'm never going to be able to achieve that. You read some literature, even if you're a writer, it's quite humbling. You think, wow, this is the real masters. But you know what you're doing? You're showing the student like a backdrop of, there's no perfection in this world, but the paragon, the standard of what is greatness. So if you want to draw a circle, you want to see what a perfect circle looks like, so you can juxtapose your incomplete circle, and you could know. And then you could say, okay, here's what's missing. Here's where I grow. You grow towards something. If you don't have that standard, you can deceive yourself thinking, okay, I'm not there today, I'll be there tomorrow. So it's critical to know how great we can become, not because it's about creating a sense of impossibility. On the contrary, it means you have the potential to get there. And how small you are is to tell you where you stand today. And when you're able to look at those two things together, You have the ingredients, formula for growth, for success. So Tisha B'Av reminds us how small we are, and Purim reminds us how great we can become. And we have both experiences the same day, because even Tisha B'Av, even though it's a sad day, so the custom is that in the mincha service, the afternoon service, where generally you put on tefillin, for example, in the morning service, and Tisha B'Av you put on mincha, again a reminder of the sadness of the day. So in the mincha service we say an additional paragraph. It's called Nachem. We say it only once a year. Essentially consolation. So the Arizal writes. The Arizal says. The Arizal didn't write most of his writing. It was called Kisvei Arizal. The writings of the Arizal that were written by his student Reb Chaim Vital. So the Arizal says the reason we say Nachem Tisha B'Av afternoon is because that's the time, the birthday of Mashiach, which seems, quite somewhat taken aback by hearing that. That in the throes, as the fires rose and was consuming the temple, in those fires was the birth of Mashiach. Because, as I said in Judaism, the Torah and God, there's no such thing as utter destruction. In the depths of the abyss is the birth of is the new birthing. You don't see it, perhaps, but to remind us, we say Nachem. That's what the Arizal says, which is also why we bless the moon on Tisha B'Av night. For the same reason, he says, because in the birthing of salvation, of redemption, happens in the moment of destruction. There are many explanations given for this. The Talmud, for example, says that when the Babylonians entered the temple, the Holy of Holies, so there was the Ark, the Holy Ark. In the second temple, when the Romans entered, the Holy Ark had already been removed. But the first temple was there. And the Holy Ark had on top of the cover, the catharisis, it had the two cherubs, like two angelic, an image of a boy and an image of a girl. Two children. And it says the following, that when God was pleased by the Jewish people, these two cherubs faced each other. A sign of love. Like God facing us face to face. And when God was displeased, the cherubs would turn back to back. Like you're turning your back to someone. That's what it says. When the Babylonians entered the temple, the Talmud says, they saw the cherubs facing each other. So the question, of course, is asked of all times. If God was pleased with the Jews, why exactly was the temple being destroyed? How did he allow Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians to destroy it? The destruction of the temple was a direct result of the displeasure. The Jews were not behaving the way they should have been. Idolatry, hatred. More in the second temple, but the same idea. So, Kabbalistic and Hasidic writings explain is because God was taking out his wrath on the building, but not on the people. And therefore, even though in one sense there was destruction, it was also a sign of profound love. And an additional point is that when you want to build a greater building, you have to take down the old building, the old structure. That in the place where this temple was being destroyed would be rebuilt a second temple which was even greater in years and in beauty to the first. And when that was destroyed, in order for the third temple, which will be permanent. So yes, on one hand, great sadness, and the destruction reflected the psychological and spiritual dissonance that existed in the world. The temple could no longer stand because the people were not connected with each other, with God. It was a consequence. It's not a punishment. It's cause and effect. It's like a father cannot be around when his children are fighting with each other. So when the children are fighting, in some way God has to conceal himself. There's no choice. And we're the cause. And the repair, of course, is when we are reunited and we show love to each other. But even in that moment of God removing himself, it's not, with all the sadness, deep within it is a profound love. It's a reflection of reality. If a father or mother remained in a room where all the children were fighting, just use the example, that would be a sign of indifference. It would be a sign of, okay, it doesn't matter, so what, so you fight. No, there's sometimes where you have to remove yourself because it's just not appropriate and it's like a protest. It's sensitivity to the reality of the situation. And that, in a strange way, is just as happy as open happiness, because it's reality. It's a reflection of reality. So even though it's hard for us to sometimes swallow, but when you talk to a real trusted friend, and you tell them, be open with me, tell me what is wrong in my life. Now most of us, when we ask that, don't really want to hear a full answer. We'd like to hear a half answer. I deal with this all the time, what can I tell you? And I've come to a point where I really don't answer usually, completely. Because it's hard to hear. You don't always want to hear it. But in truth, think about it logically, it'd be the greatest gift if someone really told you what the problem is. Because then you begin the healing. You don't want to keep being in denial. Some of us are looking for a shidduch, for a soulmate. And we try very hard all kinds of different ways. At some point, some people feel that's not me anymore. There must be some curse, some ayin hara, some evil eye. And I deal with this, as I said. And I remember quite a number of times, someone saying to me, I did everything I could, so it has to be a curse. So I said, so what do you want from me? You want me to find out what the curse is and help me remove it. So first I have to explain to them that I'm not a curse remover. I don't know how to remove curses. I'm not a magic worker. What I could do is maybe explore with you, maybe there's something before we get to the curse, maybe there's a few things you missed. No, absolutely not. And the more adamant they are, the more I know they miss things, because the fact is that's what objective people can help you do, is look at something that you can't see. I have yet to find a curse situation, to be very honest. And my masters taught me that the best way to remove a curse is by helping a person help themselves, and then the curse automatically in some mysterious way disappears. So to really hear that type of honest appraisal of a situation is actually quite healthy. And if that honest appraisal happens to include something that doesn't make us feel so good, the truth is that should be the happiest moment of our lives. Now, of course, we'd be happier if we didn't have the problem, and therefore we wouldn't have to talk about it. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if there is a problem. Accountants will tell you that their biggest enemy is their clients. They don't want to hear everything that the accountant has to say. They don't want to hear about a few mistakes that cost a few $1 billion to them and to others. They want it to be minimized. And it's interesting, you pay the consultant to not tell you everything, basically. You don't want to hear what they have to say. Now, of course, there are those that absolutely understand you have to be brutally honest and stuff like that. I remember when I wrote Toward a Meaningful Life, there were quite a few moments that were like epiphanies. But because I was working with a secular publisher, I really had access to excellent editors who really had real serious experience. I remember one line that never left me, and I always use it. I overuse it sometimes. And that was, I remember sitting, it was a editorial meeting. We were talking about the structure of the book, and I had presented my structure, and everyone had their comments. And then the editor-in-chief, who was especially brilliant and had a lot of experience, he said the following. His name was Will. He said, I remember the last line of the meeting. He said, okay, so you write the chapter 1 or whatever, and he looked at the editor and says, and you make sure you're brutal. That was it. Be brutal. And I remember that word struck me, like brutal. Why brutal? It's a brutal word, Doesn't sound so great. But I realized why. Because when you're brutal, that's when you achieve excellence. Not trying to make the person feel good, and so on. And it's not easy. When you're a writer, everybody's got skin. Some have thicker skin, but you got to have thick skin when you're a writer, if you want to grow. You have to have thick skin in general if you want to grow. Because the best people will be the ones that are brutal with you. And I've worked with many different types of people, and some out of respect, or just their nature is not to be confrontational, so they don't really tell it to you the way it is. Then I have, of course, the other extreme, that even when it is great, they always find something wrong. But I'm talking about honest, brutal. And I've always used it with writers and people I've worked with. I said, you need to be brutal with it, and then you'll achieve excellence. Because the greatest mind and the greatest talent, if it's not challenged, it will not become refined. You'll be as great as you can come. There are people who have good minds. They grasp things quickly. They even can write down an idea quickly. There's no such thing as quick. Yes, that's a great gift. But the real gift comes when they work hard, they exert themselves. A great mind that exerts itself will reach excellence. And a mind that's not so great with exertion can reach greater excellence than a good mind that has no exertion. That's how it is. And so that type of brutal, even though on the surface it looks like very negative, critical. Again, we're talking about constructive criticism. We're not just talking about people who like to put down others because it makes them feel better about themselves. Is a vital component in all excellence, no matter where you twist and turn. You see it in the army, you see it in as athletes, you see it in writing, you see it in any effort in business. That type of brutality in the right times forces excellence because it challenges it and it brings out the best in a person. So in a sense, Tisha B'Av is reflective of what's wrong with this world. And it's meant to recognize it, cry about it, and not to stop there, to know that the crying is the birth of the healing and the birth of the redemption. And in that sense, you could say a sad day is really a happy day. When we say Yehovchu Yom Emeil, these days should be transformed, it means it should be revealed. Right now it's still revealed as a sad day. It's still brutal, so to speak. The next step is, what does it create? What does it give birth to? And that's when these days become great days, because they will be transformed in a very revealed fashion. You'll see light in the darkness. You'll see the dawn in the night. And that is essentially the essence of where we're at. So we talk about happiness and sadness in that context. So it's a state of being. It's about knowing that you are where you should be at this given moment. And sometimes that should be in accountability, in recognizing, being sensitive to what is sad in this world, sometimes looking at yourself a little more introspective. That is also a part of the journey. But it doesn't stop there. Then there's the second half of the journey of how great you can become. Not just how small you are, how great you can become. And one actually propels you into the next. So that's what the Talmud says, Kashem. Read it now literally, Kashem. Just as we are sad, just as we diminish in joy in the month of Av, we increase in joy in the month of Adar. It's exactly equated one to the next. As a matter of fact, Kashem means because, you can even say, because you're sad when you should be sad, you'll be happy when you should be happy. If you're not sad when you should be sad, then the happiness when you're happy is not real happiness. So it's really about honesty and reality than it is just about, okay, I'll do anything to make me smile this moment. Instant gratification. This is reality, because then you really swim the waves. A good swimmer is not someone who makes believe that when the storm strikes, the seas are calm and he can do anything. A good swimmer navigates well and stops fighting the waves and just lets them carry him. And when it gets calm, that's when he uses his efforts to propel himself forward thrust. A bad swimmer or inexperienced swimmer will just fight the waves until you get drained and impossible to move on. So it's not about just saying, oh, you know what, I have a smile on my face painted all the time. It's about reality. Knowing how to ride the waves, go with the flow, as they say. Now that's a cliche, but it comes from the understanding of the inner rhythms of life, and that life is a rhythm, and it's understanding that rhythm that's the beauty to the calendar, the Jewish calendar. So in a strange way, yes, the 9 days are not just days about grief, mourning, death, the end. It's not at all about that. It's about understanding this is a part of the cycle of life until Mashiach comes. And that cycle has to be respected and honored, just like the cycle of joy. It's not about me and you and us. It's about the bigger picture. And just as a chuppah, it's not just about us. It's about remembering that which has to be remembered, even if it's a moment of sadness or a break of the glass representing the break of the world. And in 9 days, we do exactly the same thing. So on Tisha B'Av, even though on one hand it's a darkened day, we dim the lights, and we do cover, and we do many things that are day of Shiva, but within it is the birth of the joy. The 7 days that Moses instituted of grief bring to the 7 days of celebration, and that's the cycle and the power of it all. So, to sum up on a personal note, you all are, whether you like it or not, naturally happy people. I'm here to tell you that. I'm not announcing that. The fact that you don't feel that way, well, we don't feel everything that's going on inside of us. So we have a natural happiness. The soul has a natural joy because it knows it was sent on this earth to fulfill a purpose. Now the question is whether your body and your day-to-day activities are aligned with that or not. If they are, you start achieving happiness. If they're not, that's where sadness comes into play. But most of us, what happens when we feel sad, we don't see it as a misalignment between the body and the soul. We see it as, okay, I need something to fill my happiness. So we go ahead and buy something. Or we do something. That alone, replacing what you should really be doing, is the problem. If you buy something or you do something that's a catalyst, that sparks and forces you back, so to speak, to a place where you can align these two, that's great. But most of us escape into another world. So what we're doing is really move away even further. And the soul becomes more lonely and more isolated and feels like there's no one caring for it. Like an abandoned child. And it's the soul that's your, basically your best tool, the best secret to your happiness. Soul's purpose. So this is the way to look at ourselves and understand, where are we at? And if you just begin to think of it that way, you begin to learn to travel backwards a bit. Meaning, you know what? Let me a little less of less of these hypnotic forces that seduce me or have control over me. A little more inner stimulation, and slowly realize that happiness is not going to be ever satisfied through any object or any activity or any verb. Those things can perhaps be, as I said, catalysts. They can ignite, but like when you light a fire, you may use twigs and paper to get the fire going, but without logs, it's not going to last. The logs are when you understand why I'm here right now is where I should be. This is where I belong. This is what I'm fulfilling the purpose of my life. Now we all have this dissonance between our jobs and our souls, between our home, personal lives, our relationships, and our so-called need to survive. And that's where the challenge is. How do you align these two? Each of us has to find different ways. But the first thing is awareness, focusing on it, and realizing that there's work to be done. And guaranteed, you focus on this in the next few days, with Tisha B'Av especially, on some of what's missing, you'll be a happier human being. How do you like that? So Tisha B'Av can end up actually bringing happiness, even though everyone thinks it brings sadness. Because Tisha B'Av is reality. It's reality of the situation, and recognizing that there are some cracks. Leonard Cohen says, the cracks, let the light in. So Tisha B'Av lets the light in, as well as the Arizal says. So see this as a pre-Tisha B'Av workshop. Tisha B'Av will be next Tuesday, actually starting there for Monday night. And it's a fast that, like Yom Kippur, the only fast that goes 24 hours, Monday night to Tuesday night. The different customs involved. I didn't really go into the technical part. That you can, I'm sure, check it out online. There's the different things we do on Tisha B'Av, but I focus more on the soul of Tisha B'Av, the psychology of Tisha B'Av. And hopefully it can help us all deal with even this type of time of the year, but most important to deal with our own inner breaks, our own inner temple that may be somewhat been destroyed. But there's nothing that's totally destroyed. It's only on the outer appearance. So I don't know if we say happy Tisha B'Av is not what I'm going to say. Maybe best a meaningful Tisha B'Av. People like to say an easy fast. I don't know what that means exactly. Maybe a fast is not supposed to be so easy, but let's say a meaningful one, okay? Easy it should be. It shouldn't be obviously too disturbing to anyone. But remember, fast is a fast. It's meant to be not so comfortable. And let's be honest. Obviously, those of us addicted to caffeine have additional issues involved. I don't know what your tricks are. I never liked coffee, so I never had this problem, but I know my mother did and others I know. So either they get off caffeine like a week before, or I don't know what the tricks are. But that's an additional element. When the temple was destroyed, I don't even know if they had caffeine. So that was not their problem. They had sinas chinam and other bigger issues to deal with. So, and may these days be transformed from sadness, sorrow to joy, and from pain and tears to great celebration. And above all, in our own personal lives, I say again to you, I say, you should be consoled, and may your Father's soul go where it has to go, and give you strength, and become a stronger person through this process, because you're actually just finished Shiva. When did you stand up? Today?
Yesterday.
Wow. Okay, so we have here I'll call it a living example, I don't know, but I'm not going to do that, but no one should know of any sadness, only good things. When you know sadness, we should know how to transform the sadness into joy, tears into growth. Thank you very much. We will be here next Wednesday night, which is the day after Tisha B'Av, talking about redemption and what happens after the storm, the day after, and it will continue. There'll probably be some schedule changes because I'm traveling later in the month, but hopefully everything we'll definitely have online. Hopefully, but we'll keep you announced. So if you haven't left your email address, please do so. And Philip's class will take place tomorrow. Oh, Philip's on vacation. Sorry, he'll be back next week. And if you haven't seen my book 60 Days, it may be appropriate also. Do you have any here yet? No. Okay, so I shouldn't announce it. Okay. Okay.
Special price right now.
Yeah. Okay. 60 days is the period that begins actually the month of Elul and Tishrei next month. But Elul is, as you'll see in that book, it's all about the birthing of the new year. Is all birthed actually in this month of Av. Moses is right now on the mountain trying to figure out how to fix some breaks, but he's having difficulties. So that's where we are right now. But it leads into the month of Elul. As a matter of fact, Aryeh, which is the mazel of this month, Leo, Aryeh in Hebrew, is 4 letters. Aleph, Resh, Yud, Hey, is an acronym that Al-Shalosh says, an acronym for Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Heshayna Rabbah. All born, as I said, out of the destruction of Av. So, really, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah is all being born as we speak right now. So it's interesting play of juxtaposed months. So, again, thank you very much. It's an honor to be part of your journey, and I hope you feel the same way. Thanks.